Hello, and thanks for joining our webinar. Really great to have so many people with us. This is certainly a very popular topic. We have a lot of people in the audience and the numbers going up quite rapidly. So thank you and a big welcome to you all. This webinar is brought to you by Enscape, our real-time rendering plugin that works directly within your CAD or BIM modeling tool, which at the moment includes Revit, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, and Vectorworks. And the goal here today is that you leave with some great ideas and tips to help you improve your visualizations. So regarding questions today, we invite you to send any questions that you may have via the questions pane on your screen, and we'll get back to you either during the session or shortly afterwards. So feel free to send those over to us. All right, and as you can probably see, with me today, we have a guest speaker, Ted Vitale, who is an architectural design visualization specialist and also the founder of Voxl.Vision. So thank you for being here with us today, Ted. Great to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
Yay, good. And we're going to jump into the presentation pretty quickly because Ted's got a lot to take us through. So I am going to make Ted the presenter, and Ted, you can start sharing your screen and we can jump right in.
Okay. We know if we can see the screen and everything's good. All right.
Looks good.
All right, well, thank you for having me. We are Voxl.Vision. We are a team focused on visual marketing for real estate development, marketing firms, design teams, and architects and builders, obviously. We have been in business for about 3.5 years now, and our goal primarily is to have a group of artists who can visualize fast, fun, and efficiently. We tend to think that rendering should be fun, and we try and produce projects that reflect that. I founded the company, like I said, about 3.5 years ago now, with my business partner, Austin Pepple, who's acting as our technical lead, doing just about everything that I don't want to do, like scripting, blueprinting, software development type things, and other software, and then generating really highly detailed models of furniture, organic elements, things that need to be textured in substance and developed further, things that the average architect may not tend to get into. We also have Marcus, who joined us a couple of years ago as an intern. He generally acts as the man of many hats and manages coordination of assets, general production tasks, and he's our go-to guy when it comes to large batch exports of lots of things for projects. So typically, as a firm, we handle everything from commercial to large-scale aerials to mixed-use residential and luxury high-end real estate marketing, all of which we do in Enscape. We find that the overhead of using other products tend to limit our ability to communicate with clients, and Enscape gives us that flow that you're always looking for as an artist to kind of help the designer's concept come to fruition while still being able to give the client the best possible illustration. So we do a lot, we wear a lot of hats, and we try to focus on architecture of all shapes and forms, but we tend to lean towards the luxury real estate market and high-end homes, just because that just seems to be where our market has headed. Today's topics, however, are going to focus primarily on a few things. The basic scene setup. We're assuming as an artist you've used Enscape before, and if you haven't used Enscape, a lot of our presentation is going to be cross-platform. You can use it for rendering in anything, but we're going to have a focus more on Enscape. But the assumption here is you know how to basically light a scene and generally develop a scene to a certain point. And we're going to show you how we go about taking the illustration from pretty good to really great, and what our process is behind that. So some lighting and materials and view selection, and then the bulk of it is going to be asset prep and third-party plugins for asset generation, because I think this is one area that is very subtly talked about. You know, everybody kind of knows how to do this in the visualization side of the firm, but I don't think many architects or designers know what goes into this part. And I think it's very, it can be very time consuming, I won't lie, but there's a lot of value to having really high detail models that you can bring into your SketchUp, Rhino, Revit scenes on a regular basis. Now again, this is going to be more SketchUp heavy, but some of these principles will apply to Revit, Rhino, Vectorworks, ArchiCAD, anything that shares the Enscape assets workflow will be able to benefit from this as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about placement, simple placement discussions and ways to get a little bit more detail out of some of these things, and hardware limitations, having realistic expectations of what your system runs and how you'll be able to produce some of these higher end images with your hardware. So setup 101, we're going to be, like I said, making a couple of assumptions about your working knowledge of Enscape. Assuming you've used it, you can generate something, and you have a basic knowledge of the program. We're also going to be working in 2.9 today, which I know that everybody works in 3.0 since the recent release. However, we make it a point in our office not to upgrade mid-project, and since we have so many projects running in 2.9, we're not upgrading just yet. That said, everything we're showing you here is applicable to projects in 2.9 or above. So nothing I'm going to show you here won't work in 3.0 or 3.1, which I hear is coming out soon. So basic scene setup, we're going to briefly touch on this, show you a little bit of a live demo on kind of finding those great view locations. It really helps to have a good model to start with. Model as much as possible in SketchUp, Revit, Rhino, whatever application you're using. You want to have details. Fillet edges that are going to be up close in your view. Make sure that the plants that you use in the foreground that are going to be seen the most often are going to be highly detailed. If you're doing interior scenes, make sure that the furniture you're using is very detailed. If you're going for the photorealistic realism side of things in your illustrations, that's what we kind of tell people, is the more detail in a model, the better your rendering will be. Also focus on lighting. We tend to try and steer towards natural daylit type of lighting. For the most valuable shots, we tend to lean on exterior lighting versus interior lit spaces. And then exteriors, we focus on having as much natural light as we can, whether that be through HDRIs or Enscape default lighting. You can get some really great results out of both. A lot of the topics that we're going to cover about asset generation are going to be for the exterior, but can also be applied to interior asset production for like high detail furniture, lamps, things like that. Things that I'm not going to be covering are going to be interior lighting, setting up lights and light fixtures. I think that is another whole 45-minute conversation. So, first things first, whenever you're setting up a scene, experiment with some lighting. You want to find something that works. These are all naturally lit with Enscape's default lighting, sun and sky system. Go through some iterations, find something that works, and then work with it from there. Also experiment with some HDRIs. You're going to do a lot of testing and figuring out what lighting profile you think works best. As you test those things, you'll find that you lean on certain HDRIs more often than not because they light your scene very well. And And then finally, you know, finding your point of view and adjusting the point of view to make things work. I always try and start on 1-point perspective views because those are typically the most visually impressive shots. Is those 1-point perspectives really sell you on the space, exterior or interior. So the danger with some of this stuff is everybody wants to show everything. Don't go too far with your field of view or depth of field. Less is more in these situations. You can get a really distorted image really quickly and unintentionally make clients focus on things that you don't necessarily want them to focus on, because at these extreme angles, people look at it and it doesn't click that this is a real building anymore. It feels almost cartoony when you get too far out of perspective. Using accurate materials, this is important, and I hear with the latest release of Enscape, you're going to have a whole material library that looks really pretty great. So having realistic materials is going to be a little bit easier for everybody to get through. I think that's really exciting. And most importantly, and I'm saving this for last, always have a goal in mind for when you're setting up a render. What are my goals? What am I showing? Who is my audience? What is my mood? And what's the story I'm trying to tell? In this particular project, we were trying to communicate a client's yard space on a very high-end home, and clearly communicate that it is a space of tranquility and relaxing, and you want to be there and just sit by the pool. And that I think we in turn ended up doing, because the backyard on this project looks almost just like this. So let's have a quick look at the model. We're going to jump over to the live demo portion of this, and we're just going to go through really quickly what some of these scene setup type elements work. So when you're in the project, I usually keep the screen sharing mode turned on, and I'll test out a few different views. We know that 1-point perspectives work best, so we usually try and find a 1-point perspective and go from there. The next part of this is, once you have kind of a view, you want to, I find this works really well. We'll go ahead and line it up over here because we know this works. So we're going to get our 1-point perspective at this pool area, line it up. We like this view, and now this is where you start experimenting with lighting. And I usually switch back and forth between white mode and color so that I can see what the materials are doing in different lighting and experiment with how it's going to look. You can experiment with lighting in a couple of different ways. You can control it through Enscape itself. I find this works well, but sometimes you miss steps when you're doing it in this fashion, because you can set the sun here, switch to a different scene, and lose your sun location. So what I usually recommend doing is controlling it through your shadows in SketchUp, unless you're doing like a night scene. And then in this one, I'm kind of liking this, maybe a little duskier. So that's kind of how I would start to set up lighting. Now the next step in this is you want to test out some other options, and I have a library of HDRIs. So I will go to Skybox. I'll select my Skybox and load one up. So let's see here. HDRIs, Mediterranean light packs are always good. Let's see here. I'll grab this guy. Maybe we'll have a purpley sky. So you want to test out lighting while this loads. You want to test out a few different lighting situations and find something that works well for your project and shows it in the best light. Pun intended, I guess. We are going to go ahead and drop this in, and I'm not going to test all of our lighting for sake of time. I know that I know this house is located on the west coast and the ocean is out to our left, so I would align the sun somewhere over here. Brightest point as sun direction, so we get that nice globalized lighting. And I would probably be happy with something like this if I'm doing a dust shot. The next thing you want to do is look at this with your assets loaded in. Now, we're going to go through how to load in assets today. I wanted to touch on lighting and things like this first. That way we got it out of the way. The goal would be to light your scene when you have your assets placed, trees, furniture, etc., because it really changes the way the do we still have audio?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Ted.
Okay, it gave me a notification that my audio stopped working.
Ah,
so
it's all fine.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So we're gonna just briefly touch on lighting and setting up a scene view, but you really want to have all of your assets in the scene before you start lighting it. It tends to make lighting it very easy because you know what you're looking at and you don't have something that comes up later on that may not potentially work. The reason I'm doing it now is because once you get all the assets into your scene, it becomes exponentially more difficult, and I didn't want to crash while I was lighting because you're still going to run into some of these issues along the way. These are very large scenes we're dealing with, and I want to make sure that everybody realizes that that's kind of part of the process. Save often, save always. So now that we kind of know about lighting our scene and what we want to kind of do with our viewpoint, we're going to jump back to our presentation. Right, present. Full screen. And we're going to start talking about asset sourcing and preparation. And I call this section how to generate headaches for yourself and make lots of work for interns. And the reason I say that is because we realize that this is difficult and there's a lot of content out there and it's not all generated for SketchUp. So no matter what you download, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to process it in some way that SketchUp can read it and effectively use it. And that's really what we're doing here, is figuring out, showing the process of how to build out that asset, add it to your asset library, or add it to a library of content that you can use in the future. So let's talk about the different ways that you get content from third-party content providers into SketchUp. Now, what is a third-party content provider? Anybody who sells 3D assets. It could be TurboSquid. They have a ton of assets. Be prepared to spend some money. Good assets aren't free, and it takes artists a lot of hours to generate a lot of this content. So be prepared to, budget for the cost of good content to add to your scene. Xfrog has some really great libraries. Some of their older stuff doesn't look quite as realistic, but some of their newer libraries are pretty great. CG Trader is another location that sells some great content. Always check the different sites. There is overlap between different 3D elements on different sites, and you can find better deals sometimes by checking which site has what. And then Polygon is a great resource for materials, but not a lot of people realize that it's also a great resource for 3D assets, like some small house plants, rocks, furniture, some other things that become pretty useful. And then Quixel Megascans, this is a really great library if you're trying to put together kind of a different scene. They've got a lot of content designed around, I'd say game design is kind of more their focus, but there's a lot of architectural assets that really become useful. And on top of that, they've got a great material library to work from. There's a lot of content on there. And on top of all of this, if you are an Unreal user, this is all free content as well. Globe Plants is a wonderful asset library for more than just furniture and assets. They focus only on nature elements and trees, plants, things like that. But they have some of the most detailed that I've found. Their content is really great for exteriors. And a new one, if you're a SketchUp user, is 3D Bazaar. This is, I believe, Lindale. I think that's who develops it. The guys who make Scatter and Transmutr make this. And this is a really nice tool for bringing content, 3D content of any kind, into SketchUp. Finally, Arc.Vision has a plugin for their RPC content that can link things like lab work trees and render people and a few others directly into your 3D model. This is, I don't know if this is released yet. I'm pretty sure this is out, but it's a pretty great tool when it comes to content and resource allocation, just getting stuff into your scene. It's pretty nice. Now let's talk a little bit about the different tools that you're going to be using. We don't just use SketchUp in our office. We have a plethora of tools that we are actively using at any given time. You can see the artist working behind me is working in Blender. That's the first program we're going to talk about. It's free, it's open source, and there's a ton of content out there in Blender that you can use, convert, and bring over to SketchUp, and vice versa, bring SketchUp assets into Blender. I'm a big proponent of using Blender because it's a great little tool to have on hand, and it does a great job of prepping assets for your scene. The next product is 3ds Max, and it is a difficult product to work with if you've never used it before, but it is one of the biggest bridge products that I recommend because it ingests everything and it exports everything. There are just innumerable factors as to why you end up needing 3ds Max in one form or another. So I recommend trying to get a license of that. I know that's an expensive one, and if you're not doing this in a production setting, I don't necessarily think you need it, but if you're trying to get photorealistic content out of these types of renderings, this is one that will be a very important tool in your tool belt. And there are some plugins that go into that we'll discuss later. Scatter is another one that comes up pretty regularly. It comes with a few assets ready to go. We don't use this as much with Enscape just because it can really quickly cripple a scene with its grass and its scattering elements. You can overscatter, and I tell people to use it very sparingly. We won't be getting into how to use this today. This is, again, another webinar in and of itself. But the same guys who brought you Scatter also bring you Transmutr, which is a great piece of software that is incredibly important because it allows you to bring in non-SketchUp elements into SketchUp and really is a valuable tool when generating assets for other rendering software and pulling SketchUp assets in. And then finally, obviously, Enscape's custom assets editor is incredibly valuable when you're working in a team setting. You can build out an entire library of content, and you can really quickly access that on multiple team machines if you're working over a network. This is a really valuable tool. I can't stress enough how awesome this has been. There are a few things that are caveats to it. Categorization of assets inside of the custom assets library is something that you can't do. But that being the only real big issue, I think it's a great way to resource collect lots of really high poly assets in easy to use sort of way. So jumping back to 3ds Max, I'm going to show you something in 3ds Max and why it's valuable. It's a program called SimLab. It's a plugin for 3ds Max, and it's a great tool for when you get really high quality 3ds Max assets, and you want to take those assets and pull them into SketchUp, Rhino, Revit, or something else. Now this, you can export it out as an OBJ FBX with materials and load it into the Enscape assets editor. That way, if you want to go directly into SketchUp, you would have to use something like SimLab to get it out of Max and into SketchUp. So I'm going to show you that process because the export to OBJ, it's less important, and I think it's not really valid for what we're doing, and you'll see how I mean by that. So let's pop over to 3ds Max. We have this asset in here already. This is from a model from NASA. It's their Mars rover model. It's a pretty lightweight asset, but it's really well textured. So we're going to go ahead and select SimLab, and we've got our SketchUp exporter. We're going to just go ahead and export SketchUp file. Once we export it, we get this publisher. You can, if you've got a really big asset, rescale your texture maps. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hit OK, let it process the element. And this process is the same whether it's this 3D asset or a tree, a car, any other model. I'm going to drop this onto my desktop in my Enscape presentation, and I'm going to call it rover. It's going to run its thing. Give it a moment, have a sip of coffee, and that's nice and light, so it exports really, really quickly. So now we can open up that model in SketchUp. Go back to our desktop here. We've got our SketchUp rover model. Everything worked correctly, which it should have. And we've got our rover model inside of SketchUp. Now, the great part about this, and I'm going to adjust my styles here because it always comes in with these profiles. Turn off edges. This is a really nice high poly model. We can see kind of the mesh that we're dealing with. And this works with, like I said, any 3D asset that is in 3ds Max. Now, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to go ahead and hop back to our presentation, and we'll get back to why all this is important in a moment. So now that you know roughly how to export from a third-party program, how do you get these assets into SketchUp or into Enscape? So there are a couple of different ways to do that. You've got your Enscape objects linked model approach, and you've got your Enscape assets approach, and you've also got your go-between, and I'll get to that in a second. So the Enscape linked assets are different from your custom assets, and I want to kind of stress that going into this, and there's pros and cons to both. So the Enscape linked asset, oh, I just realized I'm not full screen. Let me go ahead and full screen present. There we go. And enter full screen, and all right. So the nice part about an Enscape linked asset, we've got this rose plant right here. That comes into SketchUp. And once it's in SketchUp, we've got our bounding box as a proxy element, as a linked asset. And it renders like this. That is really great for when you are dealing with high geometry, high poly assets, and you're dealing with a lot of them. The nice part about this is with Enscape assets, it allows you to quickly update that model or have others on a network update the model through SketchUp. And it's not Enscape dependent, so it's not loaded into Enscape and lives there like the custom assets do. Now, the cons on this are it's limited to only SketchUp files, so you can't do this with an OBJ, FBX. You can't just load in any custom asset. It requires an import into SketchUp, which is what I was showing you in 3ds Max. And it can have issues with materials and textures and asset control when you're in a model. If somebody changes that 3D model, moves it, it can break everything and cause a lot of headache and struggle later on down the line. And finally, you always have to import these assets into SketchUp first before you can get them into Enscape as a proxy or as a linked asset. Now, the custom assets are really nice because you have this beautiful visual library at your beck and call. You have lots of plans that you can load into it, lots of assets that you can load into it. It works the same way where you've got this perfect little proxy model box that is simple and elegant and keeps memory down. But the caveat here, and like I said, it allows for fast updates. You can import other types of files like OBJ and FBX without going through third-party importing tools. And it's easy for multiple users on a network to access, but you're limited to only one user really easily accessing and editing those components that were created. So like I said, Marcus is our head of asset management. He's the only one who has access to those easily. I can find them and I can edit them, but it takes me more clicks and more steps because I wasn't the original creator of the asset. So whoever creates the asset is kind of the king of the assets, if you will. So only one person in your office, if you're networked, can have access to those assets and easily update and edit them. So, you know, that's one caveat. You can't control or edit the mesh, whereas the SketchUp assets as linked models, you can update the mesh as many times as you want, and it'll update the asset in Enscape. And then, like I said, only Enscape can use it. Even though Enscape can share that across multiple platforms, it's not a SketchUp file that can then be used for another rendering product. And in most offices, you have multiple rendering products in any workflow. And there's no real control over organization of how you hierarchically divide up those assets. So with those two things in mind, there's a lot of ways to get components that you export from 3ds Max into SketchUp or Blender into SketchUp. I'm going to go through kind of some of the ways that you can do that. Obviously through Enscape custom assets, you can do it through Transmutr. We went over the importer for 3ds Max, or the exporter for 3ds Max, the SimLab exporter. And then you've also got third-party libraries like 3D Bazaar that actually pull the content in for you and manage it all. And then Arc.Vision, RPC, same kind of thing. The problem with elements like 3D Bazaar and Arc.Vision, RPC is you're relying on a third-party tool. And if that third-party tool breaks or something doesn't work right, it becomes difficult to track down where that breakdown happened. If I've got enough time, we're at we're at 30 minutes now, just about. If I have enough time, I'll look at 3D Bazaar and Arc.Vision with you guys and talk about those two plugins, but I don't know if we'll have time today. So putting all these pieces together and generating content. So we're gonna go back, hide this guy, and we're gonna jump into an empty SketchUp scene. So we're gonna go back here to our rover. We're gonna open a new scene. Give it a minute, have a cup of coffee. And we work in an open office, so I apologize if there's noise coming in from the background, but it's one of the more fun things about working in the space that we're in now. So I apologize if there's any noise coming in, but let's see. The joys of a live demo and SketchUp not wanting to open. All right, we're going to jump into Task Manager and just turn this off if we can.
Always fun when these things happen during a live demo, aren't it?
It's part of it.
Not to worry though.
Let's see.
Comment in the chat from someone here. No need to apologise for the noise. Noise can be life. Oh, that's good. No, but it all sounds fine.
What did you say?
Noise can be life. So yeah, that authenticity, I think.
Yep. All right. And it looks like our Bond Hill project has crashed as well, which was what I was afraid of. So I will show you how to manage your asset placement in a blank scene, because that's part of live presentation and demo. Sorry, everybody. We're actually in the process of upgrading our licenses in SketchUp to the newer version as well, so I'm hoping that'll make a difference. But we also have lots and lots of plugins, so things take a while to load.
But
there are ways around this, but
someone in the audience has said, this happens to me all the time when presenting to my supervisors.
It's part of it. Okay. While that's loading, let me in the background. Let's see if I can load everything back up and still have enough time to present. So while that's loading up, I'm going to go ahead and start up Transmutr, because that is an app that is standalone. So Transmutr is a pretty great tool, and we use it all the time. It's incredibly valuable when you're dealing with large, high poly models. This guy back to the front. So we're going to browse to the file. It'll open 3ds Max, DAE, FBX, and OBJ, as well as STL models. We tend to only deal with FBX and OBJ. Those tend to give us the best results for really high poly models. And for our high poly model, we're going to use this element here. So this is a little pool floaty. We're going to pull it in. I'm going to go to Materials. Of course, nothing's pulling in automatically, but that's all right. We're going to fix this so that it's upright. We're going to say that its origin is bottom center, and we're going to go ahead and scale it down 50. Go 10. Maybe 20. So it's in. It's a nice big floaty, but it's got no materials. So let's hop over and add some materials. So we're going to go ahead and grab our material skin. Now we got our color. We are also going to get our normal. That's going to be this one. Our reflection mapping. Some of this is not specific to Enscape, but I'm just going to load all these up. All right. Just throw them in there. And that should be good. And we're going to go ahead and transmute this. I'm going to save our SketchUp file out into the same location. Let that transmute. And the great part about this is we can open it up. Pull it in. And have it ready to go. All right, so there's our little floaty. Well, I opened the wrong project, but we'll work on this project. It's got a pool as well. So we're going to come to this project. This is another LA home that we're working on at the moment. don't think it's quite as detailed as the Napoli project at this point, but we'll use it for this. So now what we do is we've got the SketchUp asset that we're going to pull in as an Enscape custom object, or a linked model, excuse me. We're going to grab that linked model that we just created, go to our desktop, grab this guy, and drop it right here. While we're doing that, we're going to load up a scene render and let that export. It should only take a few minutes. Now, the other nice thing about this is you can have one person working on your asset while you're working on your main model. So I can be in my Enscape or in my SketchUp model here working while somebody else in the office is working on a specific element that's going to be pulled in. And the nice part about linked models is you're going to be able to update that model and have it reflected in the master file that you're working in. So while we're waiting for Enscape to export textures and things like that, we're going to continue to work inside of this. We're going to go ahead and generate an Enscape asset, and we can talk about what the different opportunities are for control over your asset between the two applications, the two tools within the application. I knew I was biting off too much with a live demo and a presentation. I have a very fast computer, but running Enscape and streaming and trying to convert assets can be taxing. So I apologize to everybody, but no, it's not just you. This is something that happens to everybody who does this kind of work. And if there are any pertinent questions while we're waiting for something to happen, I'd be happy to answer some of those. So we're gonna open up a source file. We're gonna import our geometry. We're gonna head to our desktop. So just like Transmutr, we have an asset that we're going to generate and bring in through Enscape this time. So it's a very similar process. We're going to get our textures and our materials, load them in. We're going to say this is we're going to call this foliage so we get some light transmission through the floaty. We're also going to I'm going to just adjust the roughness on this so that's nice and shiny. And I'm going to drop the size of this guy because he comes in a little bit too large. So I'm going to zoom all the way in on him. Smaller. This is the one thing that I struggle with inside of the Enscape custom assets is scaling things becomes immensely more difficult because there's no way to jump back to whatever the thing was if you scale it too small. I'm just going to say, for the purposes of this, I'm going to say 4 by 3, so it'll be a little bit big. We're going to go save the project. Go ahead and just save it to my desktop location for now. And then generate asset. I don't know if this is going to work because I saved it to my desktop, but take a picture of it. So there's a lot of things that have to happen before you can generate a piece of content inside of Enscape. So it becomes a little bit difficult at times. see if this works. I don't think it's going to load in here. I think I have to change. Yeah. All right, sorry guys, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the asset generation inside of Enscape because we usually generate assets on our network drive, not on our local machines. So I'm gonna go into this a little bit differently. Anything you generate in your custom assets list is going to populate in here, and you'll be able to use it over and over. And the point that I was trying to make was it's a little less editable later on down the line, whereas your custom or your linked assets, so we'll jump back over here. It's almost done. We're almost there. We're gonna make it, guys. I think I'm coming on up on 2:45, so we're gonna hopefully get this in there.
As that's loading, Ted,
Sorry,
there was a question. No, not at all. A question did come in about linked models and whether it's only available in the Enscape and SketchUp tool. Do you know anything about that?
So linked models, as far as I'm aware, only work in Enscape for SketchUp and potentially Enscape for Rhino, although I don't quote me on that. Somebody more knowledgeable than myself might have to answer you on that one. But as far as I know, it's something that is limited to certain software packages. If you can do it in Revit, I imagine, I'm pretty sure the only way you can do it in Revit is through the custom assets. So, and Gemma, I don't know if you can clarify on that, because we don't work inside of Revit as our primary tool, so I can't really answer that specifically. But if you are trying to find a tool, a function that will get elements from your library to other applications like Revit, Rhino, so on and so forth, you're going to want to look to the Enscape custom assets functionality. That's going to be the best way to get elements from one platform to another the fastest. Unfortunately, there's no real way to do that right now through linked models, I don't think. I hope I answered that question, but the long-winded answer is I don't really know. Or the short answer is I don't really know. The long-winded answer is what I just said. So.
I think linked assets do work in Revit, but we can certainly look into that and we can get back to you after the webinar just to confirm.
Yes, yes. I apologize. This is an incredibly large model, but I think it just switched over. So are we there yet? Let's pop open our right. I think we're still updating in Enscape. So as soon as that's updated, I think the real power here behind linked models is the ability to link a model and then edit it after the fact. Where in Enscape for their custom assets tools, you can't really do that as readily available as that tool is. It's not as effective at quickly controlling changes. So I'm going to just go to clear sky. Nice sunny day. So we've got our asset in. Now we're back on track. Sorry, everybody. Crashes happen. So we've got our asset in the scene. We are working along, and let's say somebody else in the firm is working on detailing out certain elements in the model. The great part about this is if you go into that model, let's say you want to change this model's texture, grab our plastic skin. I want this guy to be green. He's going to update green. This is a bug that frustrates me. For some reason, if you change the texture inside of Enscape, it changes the parameters here. I don't fully understand why that happens. So we'll do it inside of SketchUp. Okay, so we've got our green ducky. We're going to save him. Once he's saved, back over here, you can reload the scene, which I'm not going to do because this is a very large scene. I might be able to just force this guy by opening back up that same little guy. It's now green. Let's see if this works. So by forcing an update, no, I have to reload the scene. So essentially what I was hoping to show is how quickly you can update elements from one thing in your main scene. Unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties today. Yeah, so in this case, I would restart Enscape and it would reload the element in my scene. So the next time I open up Enscape, my asset will have changed. Now, the really valuable part, like I said, is you can have another team member working on an element in your scene, but you can also, let's say all of the trees in the background or the foreground that are custom objects, let's say the client says all of these elements are now something different. Instead of these flowers, they are going to be a grass of some kind. I can quickly and easily change out that asset, and the next time I load up the model, it'll show in my model. So now that I've thoroughly derailed the conversation with my live demo, I'm going to jump back to my slides and enter full screen. Now, I threw a lot at everybody today, but the great part about this is the payoff. When you do get all of your assets into the scene, you can get some really highly detailed content out of Enscape. Everything that I've shown here is an Enscape rendering, and short of some very light post-processing in Photoshop to adjust colors and tweak little things here and there, these are all just pretty much raw Enscape renderings. And I think that's the real power behind what we're doing with these illustrations, these renderings, is speed and effective control over your scene, and really detailing things out more quickly with high poly models that you otherwise wouldn't be able to use in a SketchUp scene natively. So, you know, we saw some issues. Like I said, how to bring your computer to its knees in no time. We clearly had that happen. So this is my office machine. In our office, we build all the machines ourselves. This is a Titan RTX paired with an i7-6950X CPU at 4 gigahertz. This is a 10-core, 20-thread CPU with 64 gigs of RAM. And a Titan with 24 gigs of RAM. And we still have trouble sometimes loading up bigger models. And like you saw today, even our scenes break this setup pretty quickly sometimes, but that is just part of it. You're gonna run into hurdles and you're gonna have to figure them out. It's just part of the deal. But that wraps up our presentation on bringing assets in and rendering your scene with higher detail elements to kind of bring it to the next level. If we've got any questions in the chat, I think we've got a few minutes to answer them.
We do have a few questions. Thank you so much, Ted. And well done for handling everything as well as you did. Never easy doing this when you're doing everything live.
It's always a challenge, but it's a fun challenge.
Exactly. No, you did great. Thank you so much. So we did have a couple of questions come in. So let me just grab those quickly. We have about 5 minutes. So obviously you mentioned a lot of assets today, and a few people were asking how we're going to communicate to those to people after the webinar. And I just wanted to mention that we will share the recording with everyone here today, and we'll get that out to you as quickly as we can. And I'll also work on getting these assets into a blog post as soon as possible as well on the Enscape blog, so that you can reference them there as well.
Yeah, and I'll provide you with a link, links to everything that I mentioned today.
Oh, fantastic! That'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So one person was she was interested in knowing if it's, so they use Revit, and they're wondering if it's worth investing in SketchUp to achieve these kind of results, or whether you think that it's possible to achieve this kind of result in Revit as well.
I think you can get to close to this level in Revit. SketchUp allows some flexibility in how you detail out a model after you're done building it in Revit. So I think all of the models that you've seen me work on today, especially the main model, they were built and developed inside of Revit, or ArchiCAD is the other one that we get a lot. And what we will do is we will pull those into SketchUp using a tool called RVT2, the number 2 SKP. And that tool does a great job of pulling a Revit file into SketchUp. And then what we'll do is go in and further detail things out, add in embellishments, add in details, and otherwise, find opportunities to generate more detail within a space than you would otherwise get in Revit, because Revit doesn't handle super high poly models really well. And as far as I know, Enscape custom assets is the only way to get those high detail models inside of Revit, which makes life much better, much easier when you're trying to illustrate from a Revit file. But it might be worth looking into a license of SketchUp to further embellish a project that you need to communicate to either a developer or an owner. So.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And someone was also wondering, where do you get your materials from?
A few of the links that I'll share do have materials. I think my primary location is Polygon. They do a great job in providing a great material library. The other location is obviously your Quixel Megascans material library is pretty great, but a lot of our materials are generated in-house as well. So we do a lot of custom material generation inside of, I'm blanking on the name of the software. It is, it'll come to me. So we do a lot of interior texture development in Photoshop and a few other tools, and then we'll just kind of create things on the fly based on what the client sends us. Architects send us textures all the time that we'll have to regenerate in Substance Painter. There we go. In Substance to get the look and feel right. So. But Polygon's the first go.
And like you mentioned earlier, actually, about Enscape 3.1, which is coming out very soon, there will be something special in there regarding materials. So keep an eye out on social for the next week or so.
Yep.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I think we've literally hit the end of the hour, so we'll wrap things up.
All right.
But thank you so much, Ted. That was awesome. Lots of great info there that you shared with us.
Absolutely. I'm sorry about the little hiccups we had there, everybody, but like I said, it's kind of part of it, and work through it as you go. So.
No problem at all. No, thank you so much. And before everyone leaves, I just wanted to highlight the fact that we do have a user event coming up in September, as you can see on your screen. It's called Envision. So we will send some details on that in the follow-up email. So keep an eye out and register for that as well. It's going to be a great free event for everyone. But with that, I think we'll wrap things up. A short survey will also pop up on your screen when you exit the webinar. So if you have any feedback on today's session, we'd love to hear it. and we'll also send the recording to you via email as soon as it's available as well. And that email will include a few useful links as well, so be sure to keep an eye out for it, including a link to a free 14-day trial of Enscape in case you're not yet using it. So with that, thanks once again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you, Ted, again. And yeah,
absolutely.
hope to have you back with us. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.